She bathed a silent, wounded man for $300, 0 cents a day, never knowing he was the billionaire who destroyed her life. Now that she's found out, walking away should be easy. But what if the man who broke her past is the only one who can save her future? Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The room smelled like antiseptic and rusted pipes. Nora Carter wrung her hands by the doorway, glancing at the envelope on the dresser. Her first payment, 3 crisp $100 bills. Enough to keep her and Lily in their apartment another week, maybe 2, if she skipped dinners again. She looked at the man lying on the bed. He didn't move. His chest rose and fell beneath the thin, hospital-style sheet, but his eyes stayed shut. He was pale and lean, but not fragile. His hair was thick and dark, messy like a storm cloud. There were deep scars along his shoulders and across his arms, some pink with age, others fresher. Whoever this man was, he had lived through something. "Are you sure he won't talk?" she asked the nurse who was packing up. "He hasn't said a word in 3 months, the nurse replied. "Not to us, not to the doctors, but he's stable. He just needs help. Physical therapy, light care, and bathing. That's your job now." Nora bit her lip. "And you said his name is Eli?" "That's what he's called now. He doesn't correct us." As the nurse stepped out, Nora was left alone in the dim room with the man. Eli. A name that felt like a fragment, like it used to belong to someone important. She rolled up her sleeves, her stomach twisted. She'd been a waitress, a cashier, even a house cleaner, but never anything like this. But Lily was waiting at home with the sitter, and the bills were due. She had no choice. Eli flinched when she touched his shoulder. She drew her hand back immediately. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He didn't respond. She moved slower the second time, warm water and a soft cloth in her hands. His skin was cold, but not from fever, just untouched, uncared for. As she wiped down his arms, she noticed his hands, large, strong hands, with cracked knuckles and old calluses. These weren't the hands of a billionaire, no matter how fancy the envelope had looked. These were the hands of a laborer or a fighter. "Leela," she tried again, her voice gentler. "I won't hurt you." Still, silence. As she worked, her thoughts drifted. To Lily's cough this morning, to the landlord's warning taped on their door, to the empty refrigerator. She bit down the ache in her throat and kept going. That night, she returned home exhausted. Lily was asleep, curled up with her favorite stuffed giraffe. Nora sat by her bedside and touched her cheek. She whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. The next morning, she returned to the motel. Eli was awake this time, staring at the ceiling. Nora brought in a new basin of water. When she approached, he didn't flinch, but he didn't acknowledge her either. It was like working beside a ghost. A breathing ghost. "You know," she said, mostly to fill the quiet, "you're not the first man I've had to clean up after. But you are the first one who stares at the ceiling like it stole something from him." Still nothing. "That I expect you to care," she added with a bitter laugh. "You're probably used to silence." She began wiping down his chest, and again noticed the twitch in his right hand. Not pain, not fear, something else. At night, she stayed longer. She didn't know why. There was something in the room, an energy, a story that hadn't been told yet. Eli was asleep, his breathing even. She stood by the window, watching the streetlights flicker through the blinds. And then she heard it. "I didn't mean to lose her." The words were barely more than breath. Nora turned slowly. Eli was still asleep, but his brow was furrowed, jaw tight. Her heart pounded. Lose who? The next morning, Nora arrived early. The motel hallway was quiet, and the manager nodded at her without a word. She paused before opening the door, half expecting Eli to be gone, or worse, still trapped in that same hollow silence. But when she stepped inside, he was sitting up, just sitting. No words, no nod, just watching her. It startled her so much she dropped her bag. "Don't worry," she mumbled, bending quickly. Didn't mean to wake you." He blinked slowly, then looked away, as if the effort of acknowledgement was too much. "Heard you last night," she said softly, setting the basin down. "You were dreaming. You said something about losing someone." Eli's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Won't ask who," she added. "None of my business, but sometimes it helps talking about it." He didn't answer, but his eyes followed her as she moved. It was the first time he had really looked at her, not through her, not past her, but at her. "You're not a stranger, are you?" she asked quietly. "I mean, to the world, to the pain. You carry something with you, I see it." She prepared the water, careful not to let it get too hot. Her hands trembled just a little. She didn't know why she cared so much, maybe because there was something familiar in his grief, something that mirrored her own. "If you have family?" she asked. Still silence. "I have a daughter," she went on, soaking the cloth. "Lily. She's 6, smart as a whip. She likes to pretend she's a doctor, always bandaging her stuffed animals. Says one day she's going to buy me a house." That made him blink. Just once, but it was something. "She asked me last night why I was so tired. I told her I was helping someone feel less alone." Eli exhaled, slow and shallow. The room felt like it had grown heavier, but not in a suffocating way. More like something important was about to shift. She cleaned him gently, hands moving with purpose but care. He didn't flinch this time, not even when she touched the jagged scar near his ribs. "Who did this to you?" she asked. Eli turned his head slightly, eyes fixed on the wall, his lips parted but no sound came. "You don't have to tell me," she whispered, "but you should tell someone. One day." He looked at her again, really looked. Not like a patient, not like a wounded man, like someone searching for words he'd forgotten how to use. Then, in a gravelly whisper, he said, "She had green eyes." Nora froze. "Green eyes," he said again, voice barely audible. She smiled with them, laughed like the sun. I let her go. Nora's breath caught in her throat. "Your wife?" she asked. He shook his head faintly. "Daughter?" The word was a knife. Nora stepped back, hand against her chest. What happened? But Eli had already closed his eyes again, as if the strength to speak had been borrowed for just that moment. Nora sat in the old chair by the window. She didn't speak again, she just watched him sleep, wondering what kind of man hides in silence, carrying ghosts in his scars. Whatever his truth was, she'd just glimpsed a crack in the wall. And somehow, she knew. This was only the beginning. The rain started just after dawn. Thick merciless drops pounding the roof of Nora's tiny apartment like fists full of grief. The window above her kitchen sink had already begun to leak again. She stuck a towel beneath it, then looked down at her daughter, still sleeping on the couch, curled under their one decent blanket. Lily stirred, blinked up, and smiled. "Is it school time?" "Baby," Nora whispered, brushing damp strands of hair from her daughter's face. "You're coming with me today." The motel was no better. Water streaked down the yellowed walls, and the flickering hallway light made the place feel more like a forgotten basement than a home for someone healing. Nora carried Lily in on her hip, along with her work bag and an umbrella that had barely survived the wind. When they reached the room, she knocked lightly, out of habit, even though Eli never responded. To her surprise, when she entered, he was already awake, sitting up, watching the door. "I didn't want to leave her alone," Nora said, gesturing to Lily. "I can keep her in the corner with her coloring books. She won't be any trouble." Eli's eyes settled on the little girl, then slowly moved back to Nora. He exploded with agony. "She could sit here?" he said hoarsely, pointing to the empty chair beside him. Nora blinked. "Are you sure?" He nodded. Lily, shy at first, clutched her drawing pad and approached cautiously. She sat, legs swinging, peeking up at him between crayon strokes. "I like your name," she said. "Ellie's a good name, sounds like a hero's name." His lips twitched, almost a smile, almost. Nora used the moment to begin preparing his bandages. She knelt beside him as the rain lashed at the window and started unwrapping the gauze. For once, he didn't flinch. "You're getting stronger," she said quietly. Ellie replied, "You're just less afraid." She paused, hands hovering. "Maybe we both are." Lily hummed to herself, scribbling a sun and stick figures in her pad. The only light in the room was her voice. "She's good for you," Eli said, eyes still on the child. "As all I have," Nora answered. "I was 22 when my parents died. Car accident. I had no family left, just Lily and me. I had to grow up fast." He tilted his head, studying her. "You kept going?" She nodded. There was no other choice. For the first time, he didn't look like a stranger. He looked like a man remembering something he'd buried. Later that afternoon, Eli ate everything Nora brought him. Rice and roasted chicken from the corner deli. It was the most he'd eaten in days. "Thank you," he muttered between bites. Nora smiled. "You're welcome." As she repacked the supplies, he asked, "What do you want, Nora? Not today, not next week. In your life." She looked up at him, startled by the question. "Honestly, to never need charity again. To wake up and not worry about every dollar. To give Lily a life where she can dream without fear." He said nothing, but she saw something change in his eyes again. Something unspoken. Something that mirrored the weight she carried every day. That night, Lily fell asleep in the chair while Nora folded towels. A crayon drawing had slipped from her lap to the floor. Nora picked it up and paused. It showed 3 figures: a little girl, a woman with brown hair, and a tall man with scars on his back. They were all holding hands beneath a rainbow. She said, "It's you," Nora whispered, "me, and the sad man." Eli stared at the picture for a long moment, his face drained of color. Then, slowly, he asked, "Have we met before?" The room went quiet after Eli's question. Nora felt her breath catch in her throat. She studied his face, those eyes, always tired and shadowed, now searching, as if he wasn't just asking a question, but pleading for a piece of memory he'd lost. "I don't think so," she said carefully. "I'd remember someone like you." Eli didn't reply. His fingers grazed the edge of Lily's drawing, tracing the lines with a reverence that unsettled her. Then, as if realizing how exposed he'd just been, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and said no more. The following morning, the storm had passed, but the tension inside the motel room hadn't. Eli seemed more alert. He watched Nora work with a new attentiveness, like he was trying to understand her, not just as a caretaker, but as a woman, as a mother, as someone real. She changed his dressings. This time, he didn't wince. To hide the anger or shadow, she asked softly, not expecting an answer. Eli's jaw clenched. His eyes didn't leave the ceiling. "Fake," he finally said, "one that cost more than I ever imagined." She didn't press. The air between them was fragile, like smoke hanging in stillness. But something had shifted. For the first time, Eli allowed his pain to be seen, not just physically, but emotionally. He was no longer a ghost hiding behind silence. Later that day, while Lily played on the floor, Nora brought in a small radio she'd borrowed from the motel manager. She placed it by the window and let soft jazz hum through the room. "You like music?" she asked Eli. "I used to," he murmured, "before everything got too loud." Nora understood that more than she cared to admit. Sometimes life was so loud with bills, tears, and survival that even beauty became unbearable. "Maybe it's time for quiet music again," she said gently. As dusk fell, she caught him watching Lily. The girl had fallen asleep on a pile of pillows, clutching a frayed teddy bear. Looked up from her charting pad. "Trusts you," Nora whispered. Eli's voice cracked. "She shouldn't." "Maybe," Nora replied, "but sometimes children know who's safe before adults do." He looked at her, then, truly looked, and said, "Your daughter, she draws like someone who's seen too much." Nora's eyes filled. "She has." They sat in silence for a while. Then Eli asked the question she hadn't expected to hear from him. "If something ever happened to you, what would happen to her?" Nora turned her head slowly. "I have a friend in Austin who promised to take her. She's not blood, but she's the closest thing we've got to family. I've written it all down. I carry the letter in my bag every day." Eli looked shaken, as if the thought of Nora disappearing left a wound on him too. "I won't let anything happen to her," he said quietly. Nora searched his eyes. "Why?" Eli hesitated, then reached slowly into the drawer beside the bed. He pulled out an old photo, creased and faded from time. He handed it to her. It showed a woman who looked eerily like Nora, holding a little girl. Not Lily, but close enough in age and smile. "Sister," he said, voice nearly a whisper, "and her daughter. I failed them." Nora's hands trembled. "What happened?" "To me, to protect them, and I wasn't there when it mattered." She wanted to ask more, but the sorrow in his voice made it clear this wasn't a story he could tell in one breath. As she helped him settle in for the night, he reached out, not with desperation, but quiet strength, and touched her hand. "Thank you," he said. "To what?" she asked. "Showing me. Not all things are too broken to begin again." Outside, the sky had cleared, and inside, something fragile had begun to form. A thread of connection neither of them had asked for, but both now needed. Nora showed up at the motel the next morning with a damp coat, a thermos of coffee, and a worried heart. The door to room 6 was locked. Unusual, Elijah always kept it open for her arrival. She knocked. No answer. She waited 10 minutes, then 20. Still nothing. By noon, panic seeped in like the cold air outside. She asked the front desk clerk if he'd seen the man from room 6. The clerk shook his head. Not since last night. Her thoughts spiraled. Had he wandered off? Had something happened? She checked the local hospital. Nothing. Called the shelters. No sign. Lily tugged her coat as they waited on the motel steps. "Is he gone, Mom?" Nora's voice cracked. "I don't know, baby." By sunset, she had mentally rehearsed what she'd say if someone called, explaining to the agency why the client had disappeared under her care. She couldn't afford to lose this job. But then, the sound of slow footsteps on gravel. She turned. Elijah was approaching from the edge of the parking lot, hunched beneath a worn coat, limping slightly. His eyes looked like they'd aged another decade since she'd last seen him. "Where were you?" she blurted, rushing toward him. He didn't answer right away, just handed her a single wilted lily. "I went to visit a grave," he said quietly. "I needed to say goodbye." They returned to the room. She helped him out of the damp coat. His hands were trembling again, but not from cold. Elijah sat on the edge of the bed, staring into nothing. Nora moved to pour him some hot tea, needing to steady her own emotions. As she reached for his wallet to retrieve his ID, something she often did for his prescriptions, her fingers froze. The name on the card stared back at her like a ghost. Elijah Maddox. She dropped it. His head turned slightly, but he didn't stop her as she picked it up again, read it once more, and whispered the name aloud. "Maddox Corp?" she said, voice trembling. "You're Elijah Maddox?" He didn't deny it, didn't move, just nodded. Her hand clutched the ID like a weapon. Her chest tightened with 1,000 unspoken memories, boxes packed in a hurry, eviction notices, cold nights with Lily crying from hunger. "You're the reason I lost everything," she said, voice low, shaking. "Your factory shut down, your board decisions. I worked there for 9 years. My father worked there before me. And then one day, gone." Elijah looked at her, really looked. Sighed Aiden. "I wasn't shut it down to hurt people," he said softly. "I was trying to save it, but the board..." She cut him off. "Don't..." He nodded again. "I lost everything too." "You lost everything?" she echoed bitterly. "Did you live in your car with your kid? Did you have to choose between medicine and food? Did you bathe in gas station sinks?" Elijah's voice cracked. "I lost my wife and my daughter. The night the board finalized the cuts, I wasn't there. My wife, she was in an accident. My daughter didn't make it." The silence was heavy. Two people sitting on opposite sides of the same wound, both bleeding from different edges. Nora stared at him, jaw clenched. "I came here to help someone broken. I didn't realize I was helping the man who broke me." Then she turned, grabbed her things, and stormed out. Lily chased after her, tugging her hand. "What happened?" "We're leaving," Nora snapped. "Mom." Lily looked up with wide, confused eyes. "He's not mean. He's sad." Nora didn't answer, couldn't. She just held her daughter tight, both of them standing in the cold, hearts unraveling under the weight of a truth neither of them asked for. The next morning, Nora didn't plan to go back. She told herself she was done, that caring for Elijah Maddox, even if he was now just a wounded man in a motel, was something she couldn't stomach. But Lily wouldn't stop asking. It was Madison's turn to hope. What if he's alone again? What if he falls? Nora didn't want to admit it, but the thought haunted her too. By mid-afternoon, she gave in and returned. She told herself it was just to drop off his medication, nothing more. But when she opened the door with her spare key, what she found made her heart stop. Elijah was on the floor, pale, barely conscious, his breathing shallow. Nora rushed forward, dropping everything. "Elijah? Elijah?" His eyes flickered, then closed. She called 911, hands shaking, trying not to cry in front of Lily. The paramedics arrived fast. They said it looked like a mix of dehydration and fever, likely an infection. His wounds hadn't healed properly. Nora followed the ambulance to the hospital. She paced in the waiting room, arms crossed tightly. Lily colored in silence on a paper menu from the nearby diner. An hour passed. Then a nurse came out. "He's stable but weak. We'll need to keep him a few days." Nora exhaled. Her knees nearly gave. When she was allowed to see him, she stepped into the sterile white room quietly. He looked so small beneath the hospital blanket, his skin gray, lips dry. She sat beside the bed and reached for his hand. He stirred. His eyes opened just enough to recognize her. "Came back," he rasped. She nodded. "Of course I did." He turned his head slightly toward her. "You don't owe me anything." "I'm not here because I owe you," she said. "I'm here because Lily said you were sad, and because part of me believes you didn't mean for any of this to happen." He didn't speak, but a single tear slid down his cheek. Nora wiped it gently. "I don't forgive you," she added. "Not yet, maybe not ever. But I can't walk away and pretend I didn't see you as a human being before I knew your name." Elijah's hand tightened around hers, just slightly. The next day, Nora brought Lily to visit. Elijah managed a faint smile when she skipped to his bedside. "Hey, mister," she said, "Mom says you're in trouble for secrets." He chuckled weakly. "I told her you're not scary, just messy inside." Nora laughed softly. That's probably the most accurate thing anyone said. They spent an hour there, just sitting. No judgments, just slow breaths and soft truths. As the sun set beyond the hospital windows, Elijah turned to Nora. His voice was hoarse but clear. "I want to make things right, not just for you, for all the people I failed." "You can't fix the past," she said. "Eli," he agreed, "but maybe I can build something better than what I destroyed." Nora looked at him for a long moment. And for the first time since she learned who he really was, she didn't feel like she was staring at a villain. She saw a man who'd lost everything and was still trying to find his way back to something good. Maybe, just maybe, they could walk part of that road together. Even if it started in a rundown motel with a bath, a daughter, and a truth too heavy for words. The room smelled of rubbing alcohol and old wood. Nora dipped a cloth in warm water, wrung it out, and gently wiped Elijah's forehead. He winced but didn't pull away. His fever had broken, but the days of collapse left him fragile, his once imposing frame reduced to shallow breaths and sunken eyes. No one was paying her anymore, and still she came back. He noticed. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, in frowning. "Yet I am," Nora said softly, tucking the blanket around him. "Not for you, for Lily." She worried. He flinched slightly at the mention of her daughter. "She shouldn't." "She didn't," Nora replied. Because despite everything, you never scared her. Maybe that's what scared me." Elijah looked away. "You should hate me." "I did," she said, her voice catching in her throat. "When I saw your ID, it felt like a betrayal. I thought you were just some broken man. I didn't expect the man who signed the closure papers on the factory that fed half my town." "I didn't sign them," Elijah whispered. "Not willingly." Nora turned her head, unsure whether to believe him. He continued, slowly, as though unspooling a memory too heavy to carry. "The board used my name. I was the figurehead, the face they needed to justify it. When I found out, I tried to stop them. They voted me out." "Your wife?" Nora asked. Elijah's jaw tightened. "Gone. She left before the vote, said she couldn't handle the press, the paranoia, took our daughter on a trip, car crash, rain, black ice." For a long moment, only the humming of the broken air conditioner filled the space between them. Nora wanted to say something, but didn't know how to cut through that kind of grief. "Besides," she said instead, and meant it. He closed his eyes. "You asked why I hired you." Nora folded the cloth, her movements precise. "Yeah, why me?" "Because you were kind to a stranger, when I couldn't even be kind to myself." Nora sat down slowly, exhaustion catching up to her. "I didn't know who you were then." Why it mattered. She thought about her life, the nights on shelter floors, the terrifying mornings wondering where Lily would eat next, the social workers' stare as they evaluated her worth as a mother. And now she was here, tending to the man who, at least on paper, ruined it all. "I was evicted 2 days after the factory shut down," she said quietly. "Had just made rent, then found out it wouldn't matter. That was the first night Lily slept on the floor." Elijah listened without interrupting, and Nora found herself surprised by how much she needed to tell someone, anyone, the truth. "Every job I could," she continued. "Cleaning, cooking, walking dogs, watching babies. I even cleaned the shelters I slept in, just to keep my spot. One day, I was 5 minutes late picking up Lily from school. They filed a report. I nearly lost her. That broke me more than homelessness ever could." Elijah's hand twitched on the sheet, reaching slightly toward hers but hesitating. "I'm not telling you this for pity," Nora said. "I'm telling you so you understand what your world does to people like me." He nodded slowly. "I understand more than you know." For the first time, his hand reached fully, and she let it. His fingers brushed hers. It wasn't romantic, wasn't dramatic. It was just human. "Will you let me try to fix what I broke?" he asked, voice trembling. Nora didn't answer right away, but she didn't pull her hand back either. The next morning, Nora brought a small radio to the motel room. It crackled with static, but the gentle hum of an old jazz tune eventually filled the silence. Elijah, propped up against a stack of pillows, blinked at her, as if the sound came from a memory rather than a machine. "I thought some music might make it feel less like a hospital," she said. He offered a faint smile, his first in days. "You're full of surprises." "I get that a lot," she replied, trying not to let the flicker of warmth reach too far into her chest. They spent the morning in quiet companionship. She changed his bandages. He didn't flinch. He asked if Lily liked books. She told him her daughter read anything with dragons. It was strange how natural it began to feel, this routine between two broken people, learning how to exist without armor. By afternoon, Nora stepped outside for air. Rain had stopped, but the clouds hovered low like they weren't done crying. She thought of all the unanswered questions still clinging to the corners of her heart. Elijah Maddox, CEO, ruin, grief, guilt, and now something else. A man with eyes that had finally stopped looking at the floor. When she returned, he was sitting up, straighter than she'd seen before. He gestured to a folded paper beside the bed. "That's for you." Nora unfolded it, a printed letter, signed in ink. Submitted a formal motion to the Maddox Corp board to create a fund for displaced workers from the factory shutdown. Retroactive compensation, housing assistance, job placement, Elijah explained. Nora stared at the page. "Why?" "Because it's what should have been done the moment we failed you. he said. And because I promised you I would try to fix what I broke. She looked at him, truly looked. The powerful man she once despised had been reduced to scars and regret. But beneath that, there was something real. Something wounded, yes, but sincere? You're not the man I imagined, she said softly. I'm not even the man I used to be, he replied. That night, Lily drew another picture. 3 figures this time, a woman, a little girl, and a man sitting under a tree. Nora traced the crayon lines with her thumb. When she showed it to Elijah, he stared at it for a long time before saying, "That's the kind of life I never thought I'd get close to again." He reached for her hand again, not trembling this time, steady, grounded. "You still want to fix what you broke?" she asked. He said without hesitation. "Then start by fixing yourself. Fully," she said. "Stand again. Heal. And maybe we'll figure out the rest together." He nodded, not as a CEO or a man of pride, but as someone finally willing to rebuild, brick by brick. As she tucked Lily in that night on a cot at the far side of the room, Nora glanced back at the man resting quietly beneath a soft blanket, eyes open, not haunted for once. She didn't know what came next, but she knew she wouldn't face it alone. Nora stood on the cracked sidewalk, arms folded across her chest, watching Elijah limp down the motel steps. His recovery had been slow but steady, and each day he pushed himself a little further. Today, he approached her with something different in his eyes, resolve, not regret. "I bought a house," he said, voice careful. She blinked. "For yourself?" "For you," he replied. "And Lily." Her jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" "Small, a fixer-upper, but it's safe. 2 bedrooms, a yard, close to the "You think money fixes everything," she snapped. "Guilt remained," he answered calmly. "You don't owe me anything. No strings." Nora looked away, the flood of emotions too tangled to untangle. Anger, pride, gratitude, each one trying to scream louder than the others. "Do you want me to thank you? To fall at your feet like some grateful damsel?" Elijah said, "I just want you and your daughter to be safe." Before Nora could respond, Lily peeked out from the motel door and ran straight to him. "You're walking?" He laughed, wincing slightly. "Trying my best." "Mommy says we're gonna move soon," Lily said, glancing between the two of them. "Will he come with us?" Nora knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, it's not—" "Don't want him to go," Lily interrupted, her little hands tugging at Elijah's. "He needs a family too." The words cracked something open inside Nora. She stood slowly, looking at Elijah. "We'll see the house." When they arrived later that afternoon, the house was exactly what he'd described. Modest, quiet, a garden out front, untamed but hopeful. Elijah gave her the keys. "Strings," he repeated. She stepped inside, breathing in the scent of old wood and dust. Lily was already racing through the hallway, her laughter bouncing off the walls. It should have felt like charity. Instead, it felt like a beginning. But whispers started quickly. The neighbor 2 doors down raised an eyebrow when she introduced herself. At the market, a woman murmured behind her back, "That's the girl who bathed him for money." Another chimed in, "He probably bought her." Nora kept her head high, but inside the weight began to build. Back at the house, Elijah noticed her silence. "You okay?" "We think I'm for sale," she said, dropping her grocery bags on the counter. "Don't know you." "With a big family. Single mom, no college degree, suddenly living in a house paid for by a billionaire." Elijah leaned against the doorframe. "Let them talk. You matter more than their whispers." She looked at him, tired. "Do you believe that?" "I do," he said without hesitation. "But what matters is if you believe it." Nora nodded once, then again, as if convincing herself. She didn't owe anyone explanations, but she needed to stand for something more than survival. The next morning, she signed up at a nearby shelter to volunteer. She began hosting small support groups for single mothers, offering a space where judgment couldn't enter. where dignity returned in soft words and shared strength. One night, Elijah dropped her off after a meeting and waited in the car, watching her from a distance. He didn't walk in. He didn't offer praise. He just watched her leave. And for the first time in years, Nora felt like she was becoming the kind of woman her daughter would be proud to grow up into. A few days later, a local news outlet picked up Nora's volunteer efforts. A small feature on community outreach. A photo of her kneeling beside a table of donated baby clothes, smiling with quiet strength. But the article didn't just end there. Buried near the end was a line. Nora Carter, a former motel caregiver to Maddox Corp's ex-CEO Elijah Maddox, now helps struggling mothers. The backlash came swiftly. Online threads erupted with speculation. Social media flooded with accusations. Billionaire's pet project. She used pity to climb. Another Cinderella story, but paid for. Nora stared at the comments on her phone, hands trembling. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, but something inside her cracked. The peace she'd earned, the confidence she'd built, it all felt paper-thin against the roar of public opinion. Later that evening, she sat on the front steps of the house, knees hugged to her chest. The porch light buzzed above her, and the wind was sharp against her skin. Elijah stepped outside, holding 2 mugs of tea. He didn't say anything at first, just handed her the warm cup and sat beside her. "I didn't ask for this," she said finally. "No. I was just trying to survive." "No, that too." He looked at her, eyes clear. "You were never a charity case to me, not even for a second." She let the words sit between them. Then, in a voice almost too soft to hear, she asked, "Then what was I?" Elijah took a breath. "You were the one person who saw me when I didn't know who I was anymore, and you didn't run." Nora turned her head slowly to face him. "But I did." He smiled gently. "And then you came back. That's what matters." That night, Nora opened a new journal. She wrote for the first time in years. Not a resume, not an application, not a form for food stamps or housing aid. She wrote her story. Every wound, every scar, every small victory, and she ended the page with a single sentence. "I am not for sale. I am already enough." In the weeks that followed, Nora continued volunteering, but something shifted. She stopped hiding. She told her story at support groups. Women came not just to receive, but to rise. Elijah quietly supported the shelter's expansion, but always through anonymous channels. He never stepped in front of her again. He knew now was her fight, her stage. One afternoon, Lily brought home a drawing. It showed 3 figures, herself, her mom, and Elijah, all holding hands beneath a house with a big yellow sun. "Is that our family?" Nora asked. Lily shrugged. "I think so. It feels like it." Nora touched the paper, her fingers trembling. She turned to Elijah. "You still want to help rebuild what you broke?" He nodded. "Then let's start with others, not with me." And so they did. Together, they launched a small initiative, reemployment training for displaced factory workers, funded through Elijah's private company. Nora stood at every orientation session, introducing herself not as Elijah's anything, but as a woman who had lived the fallout and survived. And the whispers? They never really stopped. But they softened. Because eventually, the truth had more volume than the gossip. And in the quiet, steady strength of Nora Carter, the world began to see not a charity case, but a voice that could not be silenced. The headlines came like thunderclaps. Former Maddox Corp employee alleges fraud, names Elijah Maddox in lawsuit. It was the past clawing its way forward, ready to consume what little piece Elijah had rebuilt. Nora saw the news on her phone while folding laundry. The image of Elijah in a suit, older, thinner, worn, flashed across the screen. Her heart sank. She found him in the garden, crouched by the newly planted herbs, hands dirty. He didn't look up when she approached. "You saw it?" he asked softly. Strikenly. "You're going to drag me through the mud again," he muttered. "Only this time, there's no board to throw me under. I'm already out." Nora stood there, watching him pick at the soil like he could find an answer buried beneath it. Then she said what neither of them expected. "Truly, I want to testify for you?" He finally looked up, startled. "What?" "You didn't run, Elijah. You stayed. You helped. That matters. I don't want you dragged into this. You didn't get to choose to be dragged down before. Why should I?" There was no more to say. The court date was set. In the days leading up, the media frenzy intensified. News vans lined the courthouse. Commentators speculated endlessly. Is Elijah Maddox guilty of hiding corporate crimes? Will this single mother's testimony sway the public? Inside the courtroom, it was quieter than Nora expected. Still, almost clinical. She sat beside a legal team, wearing the only blazer she owned. Her hands shook, but her gaze stayed steady. The prosecution painted Elijah as a man who turned a blind eye to corporate corruption, who allowed unsafe factories to run unchecked, who reaped the profits while others paid the price. When it was her turn to testify, Nora stood slowly. Every eye turned to her. Lily watched from the back, clutching a small plush rabbit. Elijah didn't look at her, but his hands were clasped so tightly on the table she could see his knuckles whiten. The clerk asked her to raise her right hand. She did. And then she spoke. "I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a CEO, I'm a mother," Nora began, her voice clear despite the weight behind it. "When Maddox Corp shut down, I lost everything, my job, my apartment, and for a time, even my daughter. I blamed Elijah Maddox. I hated him without knowing him." The courtroom was still. She took a breath. "But months ago, I met a man who couldn't even look himself in the mirror, who had nothing left but scars and silence. I cared for him without knowing who he was, and when I learned the truth, I almost walked away." Her eyes briefly found Elijah's. "But I stayed, because he didn't run. Because he was the first person who saw me not as a victim, but as someone worth rebuilding." The prosecutor interrupted. "Miss Carter, are you saying Mr. Maddox is innocent?" Nora didn't flinch. "I'm saying he's human, and I believe he was thrown to the wolves by people who had more power and no conscience. He may have failed, but he didn't hide. He faced every silence." Then the judge nodded, making a note. Later, when the ruling came, Elijah was cleared of personal wrongdoing. The whistleblower's claims stuck to the remaining executives, those who had long since vanished into foreign accounts and gated homes. Outside, under a gray sky, reporters called out questions. Nora shielded her eyes but said nothing. Elijah stood beside her, shoulders lifted, not in pride, but relief. They walked away from the courthouse in silence. Halfway down the block, Elijah finally spoke. "I loved someone once. I thought I could save her from everything, but I couldn't even save myself." Nora stopped walking. "I couldn't save my wife, I couldn't save our baby," he said. "But you saved me." She didn't answer at first. Her throat was tight, her eyes stung. "To forgive you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But I think I already have." She turned to face him, and in that moment, something shifted. The years of pain, the mistrust, the weight of everything they'd lost, gave way to a quiet understanding. They didn't speak again as he opened the car door for her. But as she climbed in, he reached for her hand. And this time, she didn't let go. The ribbon fluttered in the morning breeze as the crowd gathered around the small garden square. It had once been an empty lot behind the community center, filled with weeds and forgotten trash, but now it bloomed with lavender, marigolds, and sunflowers, carefully arranged around stone paths and benches. Nora stood quietly by the gate, her hand gently resting on Lily's shoulder. She could hardly believe what it had become. Elijah had told her he wanted to build something meaningful, something that would last beyond either of them, but she hadn't expected this. A garden dedicated to single mothers. At the center stood a carved wooden archway with vines trailing up its sides. Beneath it was a curved stone bench adorned with a mosaic of broken tiles and pieces of glass, the colors dancing in the light. Lily had helped design it. Elijah had laid the first stone himself. As guests filed in, local mothers, nonprofit workers, a few reporters. Elijah stood near the platform, not as a billionaire in a suit, but in rolled-up sleeves and mud-stained boots. He looked at Nora across the garden, then nodded. She gave a small smile back. The ceremony began with simple words. No fanfare, no speeches from politicians, just stories. Nora shared hers last. She stepped up, heart pounding, and said, "This isn't just a garden, it's a place for women like me to breathe, to believe again, to be seen." When she stepped down, the crowd applauded, not loudly, but with warmth, real and genuine. After the ribbon was cut, people strolled through the winding paths. Children played under the shade of the trees. A group of mothers sat on the bench, sharing laughter and stories. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. Near the edge of the garden, Elijah placed a hand on the back of a wooden post where a small inscription had been carved, dedicated to Nora Carter and every woman who made survival into strength. She hadn't known about the inscription until that moment. When she saw it, her breath caught. "You didn't have to," she whispered. "No," he replied, "but I wanted to." Lily ran up to them, holding a tiny sapling in a pot. "Can we plant it now?" Nora knelt beside her daughter. "Of course, sweetheart." They found a quiet corner under the light of an early afternoon sun. As they dug, Lily explained, "This tree is called Second Chances because that's what we got." Elijah watched in silence, his eyes soft. When they were finished, he handed Lily a silver watering can. She poured gently over the fresh earth, her little face proud. Then he turned to Nora. "There's something else." She raised a brow. "Another garden?" He laughed once. "No, something different." From his pocket, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and a brass key. "It's the deed to the house, fully yours. I didn't want to make it official until you felt ready." Nora looked at the paper, then at him. Neil said, "It's yours. You earned it 100 times over, and if you'll let me, I want to keep building. Together?" She didn't answer yet. She tucked the key in her palm and stared at the sapling they'd just planted. Something inside her stirred. Hope, yes, but also courage. The kind of courage that comes after pain, the kind that rebuilds. The garden slowly emptied as dusk approached. Parents gathered their children, volunteers began folding chairs, and the hum of the city softened into the background. But Nora remained, seated alone on the stone bench bearing her name, her fingers tracing the edges of the inscription again and again. Elijah returned with 2 steaming cups of tea. He handed one to her, then sat beside her, silent. She sipped slowly. The warmth of the tea filled her chest, but it was nothing compared to the weight of the decision she felt brewing inside her. "What do you do all this?" she asked finally, eyes on the horizon. He looked down. "Because I once thought rebuilding my company would fix me, but it didn't." "You did." She glanced at him. "You were broken when I found you." "So were you," he said softly. "But look at us now." She chuckled, still a little cracked. "Cracks let the light in." She smiled at that. Then, without a word, she reached into her pocket and took out the brass key he'd given her earlier. "I never wanted to owe anyone anything," she said, "especially not a man who once reminded me of everything I lost." He waited. "This isn't about owing. It's about choosing. And I choose this life." She placed the key back into his palm, then curled his fingers around it. "But I want you to hold it, for now, because I'm not saying yes out of gratitude." He swallowed. "Then why?" "Because I'm ready to live without fear, to give Lily a life filled with joy, not just survival. And maybe," she paused, "to love without looking over my shoulder." His voice trembled. "Are you saying?" "Saying yes, Elijah, not because I need saving, but because you made me believe I could live again." The sun dipped lower, casting the garden in hues of amber and gold. Elijah stood and extended his hand, not with a flourish, not with grandeur, but simply, honestly. She took it. In front of the remaining few who hadn't yet left, he knelt, not with a diamond, but with the house deed in one hand and a small, weathered ring in the other. It's not expensive, he said, but it's real, like us. Nora looked at the ring, a simple silver band etched with a vine pattern. It felt right, like something born from soil and sweat and second chances. She nodded. He slid it onto her finger. The crowd, small as it was, clapped, teared up, even the ones who didn't know their full story. But Nora didn't hear them. She was focused on Lily, who came rushing forward, throwing her arms around both of them. "Are we a family now?" she asked with wide eyes. Nora knelt to her daughter's height. "We've always been a family. Now we're just bigger." Lily beamed. "Can I plant another tree tomorrow?" Elijah chuckled. "You can plant the whole forest." As the stars began to prick the night sky, Elijah took Nora's hand again, and together they stood in the center of the garden, surrounded by flowers, by roots, by the quiet beauty of something grown from pain and nurtured into peace. And there, beneath the tree called Second Chances, with Lily laughing in the distance, Nora Carter finally felt what she hadn't in years. The sun rose gently over the newly built community center, its orange light filtering through wide windows into a room filled with warmth, laughter, and purpose. Nora Carter stood near the reception desk, organizing donated backpacks for an upcoming school drive. Her hands moved swiftly, but her eyes drifted to the framed photos on the wall, images of women and children smiling, lives mended by second chances. She still couldn't believe this place existed, let alone that she ran it. Months had passed since Elijah's quiet proposal beneath the tree Lily called Second Chances. In that time, Nora had gone from surviving to building. The support center was now a refuge for single mothers, offering food, housing aid, and job training. And behind it all was Elijah's foundation, structured not for control, but as a silent partner in Nora's vision. Across the lobby, Lily skipped in with her backpack bouncing. "We got stickers today," she exclaimed, rushing to her mother with the proud grin only a child could wear after a day of learning. Her school. Nora knelt to hug her tightly. "I'm so proud of you, baby." From behind, Elijah approached quietly, a notebook under his arm. Gone were the suits and silence. These days he taught weekly classes in budgeting and small business skills to lower-mounting families. People listened not because he was a former CEO, but because he knew what it meant to lose everything and rebuild from ashes. "Hey, I saved you some lentil stew," he said, nudging a to-go container into Nora's hands. She smiled at him, tired but glowing. That evening, they prepared for a community dinner. It wasn't flashy, just folding chairs, potluck dishes, and mismatched tablecloths, but it buzzed with the energy of stories and shared struggle. Nora stood at the front as people settled in, some holding children, others offering warm embraces to familiar faces. She tapped her glass gently, and the room quieted. "Used to hide my name," she began. "Carter was all I had left after losing my parents. After eviction, job rejections, custody battles, I felt like even that didn't belong to me anymore." A hush fell over the crowd. Elijah stood at the back, his eyes fixed on her like she was the only light in the room. "Here's the truth," she continued, her voice steady. "Survival taught me that your name is more than what you're born with. It's what you build, protect, and wear with pride. This center, this family, this life, these are my roots now. I don't hide who I am anymore." She glanced down at Lily, who was drawing something on the corner of the program with crayons. "I walk through this door every day knowing I matter, and that every woman in here does too. We're not defined by what broke us, we're defined by what we do after." The room erupted in applause, a wave of respect and admiration swelling around her like a tide of belonging. As the evening wound down, Nora returned to their shared table. Elijah took her hand gently, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "You were born to lead," he murmured. She leaned in close. "I was born to survive. You helped me remember I could live too." Later that night, after the last plate had been washed and the chairs folded away, Nora sat beneath the mural painted on the back wall of the community center. Bright colors stretched across stucco intertwined hands, seeds growing into trees, and a phrase scrawled boldly in Arabic and English: "Survival is strength. Love is legacy." Elijah joined her in the quiet. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. The way he sat beside her, shoulders brushing, silence filled with trust, it said enough. Lily slept soundly in a blanket fort in the office corner, exhausted from the day's excitement. Nora watched the mural. When I was young, I used to think legacy was something rich people left behind. A last name, a building, a company. Elijah tilted his head toward her, listening. Where now I think it's simpler, she said. It's being remembered as someone who tried, who didn't quit, who showed up when it was hardest. He nodded. That sounds more permanent than a fortune. A soft knock interrupted them. It was Lily, rubbing her eyes and holding a small envelope in her hand. I made you something, she whispered, voice groggy. Nora smiled and reached out. Inside the envelope was a handmade card. Crayon flowers bloomed around 3 words carefully written in block letters. To Nora, Maddox. Her breath caught. She looked up at Elijah, whose eyes glistened with something deep and wordless. Phipps, he whispered. She swallowed the lump rising in her throat. So does this life, she said softly, voice shaking. So do we. They stood, walking slowly toward the edge of the garden behind the center. The same tree Lily had named Second Chances swayed gently in the breeze, its roots now firm in the soil. A bench sat beneath it, carved with her name. Nora Carter Maddox, a symbol not of ownership, but of belonging. Elijah pulled a folded paper from his jacket, worn at the edges. I've been carrying this, he said. It's a resignation letter, the final one. I'm officially stepping down from everything corporate tomorrow. Nora blinked. And then what? She replied, I raise Lily with you. I plant things, I stay. She pressed her head gently to his shoulder. That sounds like the richest life I've ever heard of. The stars began to rise, faint at first, then glowing, brighter above the modest neighborhood they had chosen to call home. Laughter floated from a nearby home. A baby cried, a dog barked. Life, messy and beautiful, continued around them. At this time, they weren't just watching it from the sideline. As they turned to go back inside, Nora took one last look at the mural. Love is legacy, she said aloud, almost to herself. Elijah squeezed her hand. And you are mine. She didn't need a crown. She didn't need an apology from the past or applause from the world. She had roots now, she had her name, and for the first time, she had peace. Fade out.